I work as a night shift security guard for an industrial park. It's a massive complex that feels like a ghost city at night. My job is mostly driving a cart and checking the gates. Most nights, I don't see a single soul for 8 hours. The silence is heavy, broken only by the hum of machinery. You get used to the shadows, but you never stop looking. At 2:45 in the morning, I noticed something unusual in Lot D. Lot D is tucked away and is usually completely empty. But my headlights caught the glint of metal in the dark. A dark sedan was parked right in the center of the lot. I pulled up, expecting to find someone sleeping in their car. Instead, I saw a man sitting perfectly upright in the seat. He was wearing a full tuxedo and a crisp bow tie. He was just staring at a brick wall with intense focus. I got out, clicking my heavy flashlight on as I approached. My gut was screaming, but I had a protocol to follow. I tapped on the glass, asking if he was all right. The man didn't flinch or acknowledge the light in his face. He just kept staring at the wall like he was mesmerized. Finally, he slowly turned his head toward me. He was wearing white silk gloves and a terrifying smile. His eyes were bloodshot, tracking me with a predatory stillness. He looked like a man who was waiting for something. There was no warmth, just a cold mimicry of a human. I stepped back, my hand going to the radio on my belt. He raised a gloved hand and began tapping on the glass. It was a rhythmic thud with a heavy gold ring. I told him to leave, but he just kept tapping. Then he reached for the door handle and started to pull. I didn't wait. I bolted back to my cart. I didn't look back until I heard the metal screech. The sedan hadn't just started. He floored it. The gate buckling sounded like a gunshot. He didn't care about the car or paint. He just wanted through that barrier. I pushed my cart, praying it wouldn't stall. In the mirror, the gate was sparking. He was through and coming for me. I reached the hub and dove through the door. My hands shook while fumbling with the key. Once inside, I slammed the bolt and retreated. I scrambled to monitors, eyes darting across screens. The main lot camera showed only empty pavement. I checked the perimeter where the gate broke. Only swinging metal remained in the silent night. The sedan had vanished into deep warehouse shadows. I sat there, listening to my ragged breathing. Every creak sounded like a hand on the door. The police arrived later, but the man was gone. We swept the area where he had sat. Near his tire tracks, I found something. It was a heavy industrial chain on the pavement. It wasn't the kind of chain used here. Here, it was clean, heavy, with handcuffs on one end. Seeing that in the lights made my stomach turn. He wasn't just a weirdo. He was a predator. The car had no plates on the footage. The cameras only caught a silhouette in a suit. I handed in my resignation the next morning. I couldn't sit in that dark office again. I still look in the rearview mirror constantly. I expect to see white gloves on a wheel. The park remains, but I won't drive past. Fear comes from a man who smiles while hunting. It reminds me the world isn't always safe. Some people aren't looking for money or trouble. They wait for you to lower your guard. Man-pisters, however, and once they have you, they never let go. This next account takes us to the Colorado Rockies. A late blizzard had turned the roads to ice. I was 23, working as a medical courier. I transported time-sensitive samples between remote mountain clinics. This work requires being comfortable with total solitude, and more importantly, being comfortable with the darkness. The wind howled through the pines like ghosts. Visibility was down to 20 feet in the storm. The heater blasted, but I felt the frost. I thought I was the only soul out there. My truck was a heavy 4x4 Fier built for snow. I had a strict deadline to reach the lab. Those samples were worth more than my salary. I was focused entirely on the road and dashboard. Driving through a whiteout is a truly hypnotic experience. The snow rushes at the glass like blurred stars. You lose your sense of speed and reality. I checked my watch, calculating the miles left. The road ahead was a winding ribbon of grey. Everything was routine, until a flash of colour appeared. I slowed down, heart jumping as I squinted. Standing in a snowdrift was a lone woman. She wasn't wearing a parka or a jacket. She was dressed in a thin, yellow sundress. It fluttered violently in the freezing mountain gale. Her hair was soaked, clinging to her face. She had no car and no hazards flashing. She just stood there, looking at the forest. It was a social glitch that defied survival. In that cold, she should have been screaming. I drifted to a stop 10 feet away. My hand hovered over the lock, pulse racing. I lowered the window an inch for air. I called out, asking if she needed help. She didn't turn, but her shoulders began shaking. It wasn't a shiver. It was rhythmic laughter. My mind was a mess of pity and dread. I couldn't leave a woman to freeze there, but something about her felt like a trap. I put the truck in park, foot on brake. She finally turned her head toward the window, and my blood turned to ice. Her face was perfectly still, despite the sub-zero wind howling around her. She wasn't shivering, not even a little bit. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out, reflecting my dashboard lights like a predator. She didn't say a word to me. She just raised a pale hand and pointed directly at the passenger door lock. That's when I noticed the faint blue tint of her skin in the light. She was freezing to death, yet she was wearing a wide, artificial grin. It was a social mimicry of a smile that didn't reach her dead eyes. I felt a cold spike of pure, unadulterated terror hit my spine. I reached for the lock, my thumb hovering over the unlock button. But a primal instinct made me check the side view mirror first. The red glow of my taillights illuminated the swirling snow behind the truck. 2 dark shadows were moving out from the thick tree line. They were moving fast, staying low to the ground like wolves. In an instant, I realized the woman wasn't the victim in this scenario. She was the bait, and I was seconds away from letting the trap in. My heart hammered against my ribs, like a trapped, panicked bird. Those figures behind me weren't coming to offer any help. They were carrying something heavy, long, and metallic in their hands. 3 men emerged fully from the whiteout, dressed in dark tactical gear. They didn't look like stranded motorists or locals in distress. They looked like hunters closing in on a cornered animal. One of them held a length of heavy, rusted industrial chain. Another had a crowbar gripped tight in his thick, gloved hands. They weren't running. They were walking with a terrifying, calm confidence. They knew the deep snow and the ice had me physically trapped. The woman in the yellow sundress suddenly stopped her rhythmic laughing. She just stood there in the gale, her arm still pointed at my door. The trap was fully sprung, and I was the intended prize. I didn't wait for their hands to reach my door handle. I slammed the shifter into drive and floored the heavy accelerator. The 444 engine roared, its massive tires churning through the fresh powder. For a sickening second, the truck fishtailed toward the steep ditch. My stomach dropped as I saw the men lunge forward in my mirrors. One of them actually reached out, his fingers grazing the cold door metal. I gripped the steering wheel, praying for the tires to find purchase. Finally, the rubber bit into the hidden asphalt beneath the thick ice. The truck surged forward, throwing a blinding wall of snow behind us. I didn't look back as I pushed the vehicle into the darkness. I looked back and saw a sudden flash of light in the woods. They had a vehicle hidden in the trees, a dark SUV with no plates. Its headlights cut through the storm like twin searchlights on a mission. I knew I couldn't outrun them on these narrow, winding mountain passes. I reached into the glove box and grabbed my emergency flare gun. It was a desperate move, but I needed to break their visual on me. I cracked the window and fired a bright orange orb into the sky. The blinding magnesium light reflected off the falling snow, creating a white wall. The orange glow saturated the entire forest, masking my exact position. It was a gamble that bought me a few precious seconds of lead. The SUV stayed on my tail, its high beams blinding my rearview vision. I was driving almost entirely by memory and the feel of the road. Every curve was a life or death gamble with a 1,000-foot drop beside me. The engine was screaming, the needle hovering dangerously near the red line. I could see the silhouette of their driver, leaning over the steering wheel. They weren't stopping for anything, not even the worsening blizzard conditions. They wanted the medical samples, or maybe they just wanted the truck. I pushed the heavy 444 to its absolute mechanical limit that night. The wind howled against the glass, matching the frantic roar of my pulse. I was a ghost moving through a white hell, being chased by demons. After 10 minutes of high-speed chaos, the headlights behind me finally faded. I didn't stop until I reached the brightly lit security gate of the lab. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely turn the ignition off. I walked around to the back of the truck to check the cargo. That's when I saw the final piece of the terrifying puzzle. A small, black plastic box was magnetized to the inside wheel well. It was a professional-grade GPS tracker, blinking a faint, rhythmic red. They hadn't found me by accident on that remote mountain road. They had been following my every move since I left the city. I ripped it off and threw it into the freezing darkness. I delivered the samples and quit the logistics company the next morning. No amount of hazard pay is worth being hunted in a blizzard. But the mountains aren't the only place where the rules change at night. Our next story takes us to the flat, endless plains of the Midwest, a place where you can see a threat coming for 10 miles. But in the middle of the night, there is absolutely nowhere to hide. This happened to a young woman named Clara 3 years ago. She was driving home late from a quiet family reunion in Kansas. She thought the open, empty road was her only friend that night. She was about to find out how wrong she really was. The horizon in western Kansas doesn't just end, it swallows you whole. For Clara, the drive along us Route 400 felt like navigating an ocean of ink. She had been traveling for 10 hours, moving from Utah toward Georgia. The landscape was a repetitive blur of flat farmland and skeletal silos. At night, the scale of the Midwest becomes oppressive rather than open. There are no city lights to guide you, only the rhythm of the road. Clara was alone, her husband having fallen asleep in the passenger seat hours ago. She preferred the quiet, but the silence outside was starting to feel heavy. The wind buffeted her small car, whispering against the glass like a warning. She needed a break from the hypnotic pull of the white lines. By 10:30 p.m., her eyelids felt like they were weighted with lead. The dashboard glow was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. She spotted a flickering sign in the distance, a lonely beacon of light. It was a small, independent gas station sitting on a patch of gravel. The pumps looked ancient, their digital displays glowing a ghostly pale green. Clara slowed the car, the crunch of stones under the tires sounding like thunder. She didn't want to wake her husband, so she moved as quietly as possible. She just needed 5 minutes to stretch and find a restroom. The station seemed deserted, a relic left behind by the modern world. But in places like this, deserted is rarely as empty as it seems. She parked near the edge of the light, away from the shadows. As she stepped out, the heat hit her like a physical weight. It was nearly 80 degrees, the air thick with the smell of dust. She noticed a rusted sedan parked at the far end of the lot. The engine was off, but the driver's side window was rolled down. Clara felt a prickle of unease, that familiar gut feeling starting to stir. She checked the passenger lock, making sure her husband was secure. She hadn't brought her phone, thinking she'd only be gone for a moment. It was a small mistake, the kind you only regret when it's too late. She walked toward the glass doors, her footsteps echoing in the still air. The station interior was bathed in a harsh, buzzing fluorescent light. It made everything look sickly, from the faded chip bags to the floor. The cashier was an older man, his eyes fixed on a small television. He didn't look up when the bell above the door chimed her arrival. Clara headed toward the back, following a sign for the restrooms. The hallway was narrow, lined with stacks of motor oil and firewood. Every sound she made felt amplified, the scuff of her shoes too loud. The air back here was cooler, smelling faintly of bleach and iron. She reached for the handle of the women's room, her hand trembling slightly. She told herself she was being paranoid, just tired from the long drive. As the door swung open, She nearly collided with someone coming out. She gasped, stepping back to give the other person room to pass. It was a man, but there was something fundamentally wrong with his appearance. He was wearing a bright yellow rain slicker, the heavy vinyl crinkling loudly. The hood was pulled low, shadowing the upper half of his face. It was a bone, dry night, in the middle of a Kansas summer heatwave. There hadn't been a drop of rain in the county for over 3 weeks. Yet here he was, dressed for a monsoon in the middle of a desert. He didn't move past her. He just stood in the doorway, blocking her. The silence between them stretched until it felt like it would snap. Clara muttered a quick apology, her voice sounding thin and uncertain. The man didn't respond, his gaze locked onto the floor near her feet. He finally shuffled to the side, his movements stiff and strangely mechanical. As he passed, Clara noticed his hands were tucked deep into his pockets. The slicker was oversized, making his silhouette look jagged and unnatural. She ducked into the restroom, quickly locking the heavy deadbolt behind her. The click of the lock provided a small, fleeting sense of sanctuary. She leaned against the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a bird. Why was he wearing a coat? Why wouldn't he look at her face? Her mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation for the encounter. She moved to the sink and splashed cold water on her face to wake up. She needed to keep it together, to get back to the car and leave. But as she reached for a paper towel, she heard a sound outside. It was the sound of the restroom door being tested from the hallway. A slow, deliberate pressure against the wood, followed by a soft metallic tap. Clara froze, her breath catching in her throat as she stared at the handle. The person outside wasn't trying to force their way in, not yet. They were just checking to see if the barrier was truly solid. She realized with a jolt of terror that she was trapped in a corner. The only exit was the door, and someone was waiting on the other side. Then, the sound changed from a tap to a rhythmic, wet slapping. It sounded like someone walking in heavy, waterlogged boots or flip-flops. She heard the outer hallway door open and then slam shut with force. A wave of relief washed over her, thinking the man had finally left. She waited for a full minute, listening to the hum of the ventilation. But as she reached for the lock, she heard it, a sharp, ragged intake of breath. It was coming from inside the restroom, just inches away from her stall. The fake exit trick. He had slammed the door but stayed inside. He was standing in the shadows by the sinks, waiting for her to emerge. Clara's hand pulled back from the lock as the realization shattered her. The silence in that bathroom was so heavy, it felt like it had weight. I sat there, paralyzed, my ears ringing from the effort of listening. That's when I heard it again, the soft, rhythmic slap of those flip-flops. He wasn't moving toward the door, he was moving toward my stall. The sound stopped right in front of the metal partition. I could see the shadow of his feet in the gap at the bottom. He was just standing there, perfectly still, not saying a single word. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. He knew I was in here, and he was waiting for me to break. I knew if I didn't act now, I might never leave this room. Adrenaline is a strange thing. It makes the world move in slow motion. I gripped the lock, took one jagged breath, and threw the door open. He was standing less than 2 feet away, his hands buried in that slicker. He didn't flinch or jump back like a normal person would. He just stood there with that same blank, wide-eyed stare. I bolted past him, my shoulder brushing against the cold plastic of his coat. I didn't look back until I hit the main floor of the store. The cashier was still staring at his phone, completely oblivious to the terror. I didn't stop to explain or ask for help. I just ran. I burst through the front doors and sprinted toward our car. My husband was just starting to stir in the driver's seat when I jumped in. I screamed at him to drive, my voice cracking with pure desperation. He didn't even ask why. He just saw my face and floored it. As we peeled out of the lot, I looked back at the store entrance. The man in the yellow slicker was standing under the fluorescent lights. Lights! He wasn't chasing us. He was just watching the car fade away. He held something up in his hand, a small, dark object. We drove for 3 hours straight before I finally let him pull over. Fear didn't leave me, though. It just settled deep into my bones. I told him everything, but even then it felt like a fever dream. The next morning, I found the proof that it wasn't just my imagination. I was cleaning out the passenger side when I saw it on the floor mat. A long, sharpened screwdriver with a handle wrapped in black electrical tape. It must have fallen out of his pocket when I brushed past him. The tip was filed down to a needle, sharp point, meant for one thing. I stared at it for a long time, my hands shaking uncontrollably. He hadn't been looking for a bathroom or a snack that night. He had been looking for a moment of vulnerability, and I gave it to him. I never reported it to the police. What would I even say? Now I never stop for gas at night without a phone in my hand. This final story happened to me back in the winter of 2021. I was 29 and working as a freelance courier in Pennsylvania. My route often took me across the Susquehanna River late at night. It was one of those nights where the fog rolls off the water. The kind of fog that swallows your headlights and makes the world small. I was driving an old box truck, hauling vintage furniture to a collector. The heater was struggling against the damp chill of the river air. I was the only soul on the bridge, or so I thought at the time. The rhythm of the tires on the metal grates was almost hypnotic. That piece was about to be shattered by a set of headlights. I noticed them in my side mirror first, two dim orbs in the mist. They were approaching fast, way faster than the posted bridge limit. I moved into the right lane to let them pass, but they didn't. The vehicle, a battered black SUV, slowed down and matched my speed. They were sitting right in my blind spot, hovering there like a ghost. I tapped my brakes to signal them to move on, but they ignored me. Then, the driver started flashing their high beams in a weird rhythm. 3 short flashes, a pause, then 3 more, over and over again. It felt deliberate, like they were trying to get my attention for a reason. My gut tightened, that familiar prickle of dread crawling up my neck. The SUV finally pulled alongside me, the passenger window rolling down. I glanced over, expecting to see a teenager pulling a stupid prank. Instead, I saw a man who looked like he belonged at a gala. He was wearing a crisp black tuxedo and a white formal shirt, in the middle of a Pennsylvania fog bank, inside a rusted-out SUV. He was leaning out the window, pointing frantically at my rear wheels. He was shouting something, his face twisted into an expression of panic. I couldn't hear him over the wind, but his gestures were unmistakable. He was telling me my back tire was about to fly off the axle. For a split second, I actually considered pulling over on the bridge. But then I noticed the glitch, the thing that didn't make sense. As he was panicking, the man was actually smiling with his eyes. His mouth was shouting, but his eyes were wide and perfectly calm. It was like he was performing a role he hadn't quite mastered yet. And then I saw his hands. He was wearing white silk gloves. He reached out and tapped the side of my truck with a rhythmic click, the same 3-beat rhythm he had used with his headlights earlier. I looked at my dashboard. My tire pressure sensors were all green. There was nothing wrong with my truck. The highway trick was in play. I realized then that if I stopped, I was never getting off that bridge. I didn't wait for him to finish his little performance. I slammed my foot onto the accelerator, feeling the engine roar. The bridge felt like it was stretching, a narrow corridor over the dark water. In the rear view, the SUV's headlights didn't fade. They stayed right there, inches from my bumper. We hit the end of the bridge, and the road widened. But the tuxedo man didn't pass me. He swerved as I swerved, matching every desperate move I made. I was trapped in a high-speed dance with a predator, and I knew I couldn't keep this up forever. As we passed under a rare highway light, I saw them. It wasn't just the man in the tuxedo. In the back seat, 2 other figures sat perfectly still. They were wearing dark hoodies and medical masks. The tuxedo man was still smiling, his white-gloved hand tapping. The contrast was sickening. A man dressed for a wedding, flanked by 2 people ready for an assault. The highway trick was just the invitation. They weren't worried about my tire. They were waiting for me to step out into the fog. I saw the glow of a truck stop about 3 miles ahead. It was like seeing a lighthouse in a storm. I didn't care about my delivery schedule or the cargo anymore. I just needed people, lights, and witnesses. I took the exit at 80 miles per hour, tires screaming. The SUV followed, but they slowed down as the neon signs grew closer. I pulled directly into the diesel lanes, right behind a massive Peterbilt. I didn't even turn off the engine. I just sat there, my chest heaving, watching the SUV. It stopped at the edge of the lot, idling in the shadows. I saw a driver stepping out of the Peterbilt. He was a mountain of a man, in a stained flannel shirt. He looked like he'd been driving since the 70s. I practically fell out of my cab and ran toward him. He stopped, looking at me like I was a lunatic. I told him someone was following me, pointing at the SUV. I must have looked terrified, because his expression shifted instantly. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at the black vehicle. Then he reached back into his cab and grabbed a heavy tire iron. He told me to get inside the diner and stay there. I watched from the diner window, my hands shaking. The trucker didn't hesitate. He walked straight toward the SUV with the tire iron in his hand. He wasn't running. He was just walking with a terrifying purpose. The SUV sat there for a second, its engine idling low. I could see the tuxedo man's white gloves on the steering wheel. The trucker got within 10 feet and pointed the iron at them. He shouted something that I couldn't hear through the glass, but the message was received loud and clear. The power dynamic had completely flipped in an instant. The SUV didn't wait for him to get any closer. The driver slammed it into reverse, tires chirping on the pavement. They swung around and peeled out of the lot, heading back to the highway. I watched their taillights disappear into the Pennsylvania fog. The trucker stayed there for a minute, watching the road. Then he spat on the ground and walked back to the diner. He told me they were gone, and that I should wait an hour. I thanked him, but my voice was barely a whisper. The adrenaline was leaving me, replaced by a cold, hollow fear. I had survived, but the world felt much smaller now. Before I left, I did a quick walk around of my truck. I expected to see a flat tire or a loose strap. Everything was perfectly fine, just like the sensors said. And then I saw it on the driver's side rear door. There were thick, greasy smudges around the handle. It looked like someone had tried to grip it while I was moving, or maybe while I was stopped at the last red light. There were also scratches in the paint, fresh and deep. The glitch wasn't just the tuxedo or the smile. They had been trying to get inside my vehicle the whole time. I quit that courier job 2 weeks later. I realized that no paycheck is worth being hunted on a bridge. Now, I don't drive after midnight, and I never stop for signals. If someone tells me my car is broken, I keep driving. If someone needs help in the middle of nowhere, I call the police. I'm not heartless. I'm just a survivor of the highway. Because out there in the dark, the rules of society don't apply. The people you meet aren't always looking to help. Sometimes they're just performing a role to get you to stop. And once you stop, the performance finally ends.